So I just did a stream with Lloyd De Young, I think. I apologize if I'm butchering that name. Um, and uh, I've I've been a follower of his YouTube channel for a long time because he has lots of interesting videos, lots of interesting analysis of all kinds of topics, but mainly, of course, relating to religion, um, and relating to Christianity and relating to Islam, and very interesting things. Not your usual uh, kind of stuff. Really, explaining and analyzing these things, and also. Um, he's been very good at explaining and really explaining and analyzing um, the Gnostic influence, in his case, especially in Islam. Um, so we did a stream together, and I talked a little bit about my experience growing up in a occult, new age commune, a a Christian Gnostic commune, and the word Christian in there is a bit deceiving. If you were to ask them what they believe, they would just say, "Oh, we are the true Christians. We are the original Christians." But what they don't tell you is that by true original Christians, they actually mean Gnostic Christians. Um, so I was able to talk a little bit about that. Uh, and there's still some things I want to add. We talked for a long time, um, but I feel it's always very difficult for people who haven't grown up in an environment like I did to really grasp the mentality of such people, of Christian Gnostics. And it's relevant because their influence, especially nowadays, is very strong. Their influence in Hollywood, for example, is very strong, which is why you have movies like The Matrix and so on. So, usually if people ask me, well, what do Gnostics believe? I just ask them back, well, have you seen The Matrix? The Matrix is literally what Gnostics believe. Of course, that doesn't mean that they believe we live in a simulation. This forget about the science fiction elements. They always code these things in science fiction elements nowadays. But uh, these science fiction elements are just a vehicle to get their message across. So they don't literally believe we live in a computer simulation. That's just how they're getting their view across, and their view is that no, we don't live in a computer simulation, but they do believe that they are absolute idealists. So they do believe that the physical world is an illusion, is a prison, is a trap that we have to escape. They literally believe that. And they literally believe, and that's why it's called Gnosticism, they literally believe that as long as they just have the right knowledge, the secret divine gnosis, as long as they just have that secret knowledge, they regard it as secret. It's not a secret at all. It has been exposed by Saint Irenaeus 2,000 years ago. It ceased being a secret 2,000 years ago, but they make it into a secret, and and they think that as long as they just have that secret gnosis, that esoteric knowledge that they propagate, um, they will be able to break out of the matrix, so to say, to break out of our physical illusory world, of our material prison, in where the evil god Jehovah, which they usually associate with the demiurge, which is basically their devil. So to them, Jehovah is the creator of this world, but he is their devil. And he created this world in order to imprison us. Just like in the Matrix, with the architect. Demiurge, it literally means architect, right? So they do believe in Jehovah, but they believe he's evil. They believe he is the architect of the Matrix. He created our physical world to entrap us, right? So, yeah, and then of course they believe that since everything material, everything physical, in their view, there exists no objective physical reality, which is what George Orwell was hinting at with 2 plus 2 equals 5. To them, 2 plus 2 equals 5 is literally true. And it is literally true to someone who rejects objective physical reality. So, since to them reality is false and is an illusion, um, they're reaching two conclusions. One, they have to break out of this reality, this false reality. They have to break out of the physical world. And I'm going to talk about the approach they're using to do that in a second. It's very important to understand their approach. But the other conclusion they reach is that be, because objective physical reality would be false, would be an illusion, would be a trap, and only the mind would matter. They think that as long as they have that secret esoteric gnosis, knowledge, that we live in a prison and so on, and as long as they truly make themselves aware of that, they will be able to control physical reality, because physical reality isn't real anyway, and the only thing that matters is the mind. So they would be able to control physical reality using their mind, which is why my mother died very tragically. She didn't have to die. She wasn't very old. She wasn't very sick. She was sick because she never went to the doctor. And then when she got sick, her illness could have easily been cured if she went to the doctor. But she didn't go to the doctor because she was delusional. I don't mean that derogatory. I mean that, she was literally delusional. But I'm telling you that this viewpoint right now that I'm trying to explain to you, to a sane person, that is literally called a delusion. I don't mean that derogatory, that's just what it is. It's a delusion. She was delusional. She was delusional because she literally thought these things. She literally thought that she could control physical reality with her own mind over matter. She literally thought that she was God. It was very difficult to argue with her or try to get her to go to the hospital when she was sick. It was impossible because she thought she knows everything, and and anyone who tells her otherwise is wrong, right? And she thought that she only needs to convince herself hard enough, and then she will be able to magically make her illness disappear, right? And then of course I would be asking her, well, how come you're still sick then? How come if you have superpowers like in the Matrix, like Neo in the Matrix, right? They all have superpowers, right? And they literally believe that, right? So if you have superpowers, and if you're your own Christ, if you're your own savior, your own Messiah, your own God, and you have the same superpowers as Jesus, and Jesus obviously could heal sick people. And if you're like Jesus, if you're a God, how come you can't even heal yourself? Yeah? And of course, she had an answer for that. It was because of me, right? I explained that already when I talked about that with Lloyd. But this is very important to get across, right? She thought it didn't. I mean, she also saw that it didn't work, but that didn't make her not believe in it because she had an explanation for that. She thought it didn't work because I didn't believe in it, right? Because to them, and that's very important, you have to understand that, to them, the physical world is an illusion and the only thing that matters is the mind. But it's not only their mind as an individual, right? So it's not enough if my mother believes she is not sick, right? That's not enough to make her cure herself, because, or it's not enough if I'm also present and I don't believe in it, right? If someone else is present and he doesn't believe in it, then it doesn't work because the other guy doesn't believe in it, right? So they don't, um, they believe in a kind of, well, they believe in mind over matter, but it's the collective mind over matter. So, when I try to, literally save her life, I meant well. I wanted to literally save her life. I told her, go to the doctor. The doctor can help you. This illness can be cured if you go to the doctor in time, right? You know, you have to go to the doctor. You have to go to the doctor now, right? I was always telling her that and trying to help her because of course I was concerned about her. you know um, of course we had our difficulties. Of course I didn't believe what she believed, um, but of course I I meant well. I wanted her to get better, wanted her to go to the doctor. But that made her so mad, right? Because in her eyes, it's precisely because I don't believe in it. It's precisely because I keep telling her to go to the doctor that she isn't able to magically cure herself, right? Because in my mind, I doubt it, right? Because they believe in mind over matter, but it's a communal mind over matter. All right, so that's why you can never prove them wrong, right? It's like that's why you can never prove a communist wrong. And my mother was a communist as well. I talked about that a lot when I when I talked with Lloyd, and there is a connection there. Um, Marx was very big on Hegel, and Hegel, of course, was very big on the dialectic. And there are different meanings to the dialectic, but of course, they're also using a dialectical approach in and of itself that involves contradiction. They love contradiction. Hegel loves contradictions. Marx loves contradictions, right? And that's why their teachings themselves are contradictory. And that's why the normal communist follower is an absolute materialist, whereas the communist leaders, and my mother was basically a communist official. Well, she was a basically lifelong communist politician with a certain status and power within the Communist Party in both East and West Germany, right? So she wasn't exactly at the level of Stalin or anything like that. She wasn't like the top leadership, but she was she had a certain position within the leadership. So at the leadership level, the communists are actually no longer absolute materialists, but actually the exact opposite. They're absolute idealists. And that's what my mother was, and that's why she was so extreme, and that's why she literally thought she could change physical reality using her mind. But of course, it doesn't work if there are people who doubt it, right? So you can never prove them wrong, and you can never prove a communist wrong. You can, if you say to a communist, well, you want a great utopia, you want a heaven on earth for us all. How come it always turns to shit? If you ask them that, I think, um, he has a very simple explanation. It's because you oppose him. It's because you don't believe in him. We could have a communist utopia, but of course that can only happen once the whole world is communist and there's no longer any opposition. And then we can transform society. And then we will have this great utopia. But the prerequisite is the elimination of any and all opposition. So if you ask them, well, how come your magical communist utopia hasn't manifested? How come your magical superpowers haven't manifested? Right? Or whatever it may be. You know, you can never prove them wrong, because they will always say, well, it's because of your opposition. There is still opposition, and we can't achieve that goal as long as there's still opposition. That's why they hate opposition so much. They think the opposition they're facing is literally what prevents them from reaching their magical goals, and their goals are magical. Communism is a magical state of society where milk and honey flow. It's a paradise on earth. It's magical. And their superpowers, of course, they're magical. And that's why you have communist and socialist dictators demanding impossible feats from their followers. That Stalin demanded things from his followers that were physically impossible, as did Mao, as did all the communist leaders. They demanded physically impossible feats from their followers. And the reason for that is because they don't believe in objective physical reality. And then, of course, if it fails, they blame it on their followers, and they claim, well, it didn't work because you didn't believe in it hard enough, right? That's their logic, and that's why you can never prove them wrong as long as there's still opposition, right? So I really wanted to get that point across, right? And that they really wanted to explain that mentality of theirs. Yeah, because that mentality is very important to understand, but that mentality is also very difficult to understand for a sane person. So I want to explain this a little bit more, because this is their mentality. A lot of people confuse what is usually called Christian Gnosticism with Christianity. In reality, it has nothing to do with Christianity, with mainstream Christianity. It's like trying to compare mainstream Christianity with Satanism. That's literally how big the differences are. But of course, in their view, mainstream Christianity would be akin to Satanism. They wouldn't see themselves as Satanists, even though they literally worship Lucifer. But Lucifer to them is the morning star, is the good guy, right? And I explained that when I talked to Lloyd, and we looked at, Madame Blavatsky, for example, her magazine. She had a monthly magazine, and it was literally called Lucifer. But to these people, Lucifer is their Messiah. And that's why they can pass themselves off as Christians, because they always talk about Christ, about the Messiah, but they rarely talk about Jesus, because when they talk about Christ, you assume they're talking about Jesus, but they're not. Because Christ isn't a name. It's not like, a lot of people get confused and think, oh, Christ would be Jesus's last name. No, Christ is not a name. Christ is a title. Christ means Messiah, means Savior, right? So of course they talk about the Savior, about the Christ all day long, and you think they're Christians, but they're not referring to Jesus, they're referring to Lucifer. Lucifer is their Christ, the light bringer. They see him in a good light, right? But it's also symbolical of their own salvation, meaning their salvation by themselves. They themselves, in a way, believe that they are Lucifer, that they are their own Christ. They regard Lucifer as their Christ, and they regard themselves as their own Christ, as their own Savior. So in a sense, Lucifer to them is not an external savior. It is an expression of their own self-salvation. In a way, they themselves think of themselves as Lucifer, as the morning star, right? As God. They regard Lucifer as the good God and Jehovah as basically the devil. So if you accuse them of being Satanists, obviously they're gonna get very offended because in their view, if you are a Christian, then you are the Satanist in their eyes. You believe in the evil devil Jehovah. They believe in the good God Lucifer, right? Because they got it upside down. But of course, they think that you have it upside down. So, since they literally believe that we live in a matrix prison, imprisoned by the evil demiurge Jehovah, by the evil architect, you know, by the evil God, you know, by God the creator of the physical world is the devil to them, basically, like the character of the architect in the Matrix movies, right? And our physical world is evil, is a prison to keep us trapped, to keep our souls and our minds trapped. So how do we free our minds? How do we collapse the matrix? How do we escape this matrix prison? And this is where it differs from normal religions. Because they always try to pass themselves off as, some kind of mainstream religion, right? Uh, that's why they're even literally called Christian Gnostics, because for the longest time they have been trying to pass themselves off as Christians. But of course, they can also pass themselves off as any other religions. Right? They have infiltrated any and all religions. And so, they might as well try to pass themselves off as Jews or as Muslims or as Buddhists. They particularly like um, uh, passing themselves off as Buddhists nowadays because they paint Buddhism as similar. And in a way, I can understand that they make that comparison, which is also why a lot of Christians view Buddhism as particularly heretical and as Gnostic, but it's not. It's just that the Gnostics have infiltrated it and they're presenting it in that way. But that said, I can understand that some people see a similarity in kind of, some of the outlook and it's kind of hard to describe because Buddhism, to an extent, does believe that our physical world is illusory, is not entirely real to an extent, and that we need to transcend our physical world. There are such elements in Buddhism, and there are such elements in Gnosticism. But the way they seek to transcend our physical world in Buddhism is entirely different from the way the Gnostics take. They might have similar goals, but their approach is entirely different. Um, in Buddhism, you also regard some aspects of society as being bad, right? For example, or especially emotions and negative emotions. So for example, greed. You know, greed would be seen as bad, or especially the greed for money would of course be seen as bad. And then what a Buddhist would do, would would be he would give away all his money. He would give all his money to charity maybe, and so that he doesn't have any money anymore, and then he would go into seclusion, maybe in a monastery on a mountain, or go into a cave, go into a deep forest. In any case, he would go into seclusion, so that he is completely cut off from the secular world and from having any sorts of greed, and from having any money and any possessions. He gives up all these things. But what's really important in Buddhism is to give up the attachments to those things. He goes into seclusion, and he gives away all of his money, um, not because money itself is seen as evil, as much as the attachment to money is seen as bad, right? So he gives up his money in order to give up the attachment to money, right? So, and that goes with everything in society. He gives up everything in society, not so much because he thinks society itself is bad, but because the attachments to anything material in society are bad. He wants to give up those attachments, you know? And that's why he separates himself from society, separates himself from any money, and so on, um, so as to be able to give up his attachments. So he doesn't care about society itself. He doesn't at all try to change society itself. He just works on himself. He cultivates himself and tries to improve himself, and tries to let go of his own greed and his own attachments and bad thoughts, right? And through that, he eventually reaches enlightenment, and eventually is able to transcend our physical world. At least that's what they believe, right? In a nutshell. It's a bit more complicated than that, but in a simplified, that's basically in a nutshell, right? But of course, his salvation is limited to himself. He thinks that, oh, if he really accomplishes all that, um, and reaches enlightenment, then eventually he himself will be able to transcend our mundane physical world. He will become enlightened, and he, maybe will even become a kind of spiritual being, right? That transcends, an immortal that transcends the physical world, right? And then maybe he will even have superpowers, and then maybe he will even have superpowers and so on. There was a car. Anyway, so that's sort of the view in Buddhism, and the view in Gnosticism is similar, which is why people always get it confused. But the approach Gnostics use is entirely different. They don't work on themselves. They don't try to give up their attachments. At least there's no focus on that, right? And they don't live in seclusion, nothing like that. They don't become monks. I've never seen a Gnostic who became a monk. So no, they don't try to get rid of their attachment to society. Instead, they look entirely outward. In Buddhism, they look entirely inward and try to improve themselves and try to get rid of their own attachments. In Gnosticism, while they might have a similar goal in Gnosticism, in Gnosticism, they also talk about some of those things, and they talk about transcending the physical world and transcending society. But the way they're trying to do that in Gnosticism is entirely different from in Buddhism. In Gnosticism, they don't look within, they don't work on themselves individually. They try to transcend a society by making society itself transcend. So they're not trying to change themselves. They're exclusively looking outward and trying to change others. And actually, they're trying to change the whole of society. So instead of letting go of their attachment to money, they want to destroy the whole concept of money in society, which is what communism is for, which is why there is a relation, which is why, you know, well, I talked in greater length in some of my previous videos about why Marx was a Gnostic, and Lloyd also gave some examples of that. Marx was a Gnostic, and the point of communism is to actually, it's very spiritual. Communism is a religion. People don't get that. People think of communism as a political organization. It's not. It's not political. It's purely religion. The goal of communism is a religious goal. The goal of communism is to not just make themselves transcend as an individual, like in Buddhism, they're trying to make all of society transcend. It's purely religious, and uh, that's why they want to destroy even the whole concept of money. That's why Marx was trying to abolish money, abolish private property, abolish individuality, individual possessions, and all that. They're not trying to let go of their attachments to greed and money on a personal basis, like Buddhists would. They're trying to get rid of the whole concept of money for the whole of society. And the ultimate goal is to make the whole of society transcend. And that's basically the true religious goal of communism. That's why we haven't achieved it yet, because we haven't transcended yet. And we can't achieve it, in their view, because they look externally. We can only achieve that once everyone the world over is a communist and there is no opposition and no one believes in the evil Jehovah. Because if you believe in the evil Jehovah, they see Jehovah as evil. So if you believe in the evil Jehovah, you're not believing in them. But they believe in a collective mind, right? So if in your mind you still worship Jehovah and still think Jehovah is your God, you're giving Jehovah power, right? Because what truly matters is the mind. External gods don't really matter to them. To them, their own mind is God, right? But if in your mind, it's a collective mind though. Everyone has to be on board or it doesn't work. So if in your mind you still see Jehovah as your God, you're giving Jehovah power, they think. That's why Jehovah can act like a God. That's why Jehovah is able to do miracles and they can't. That's why when you ask them, well, if you can do miracles, well, show me a miracle. They can't show you a miracle. And they have an excuse for that. It's because you believe in Jehovah. So by believing in Jehovah, you're giving Jehovah power, because the only thing that matters is the collective mind, right? So by believing Jehovah is God, you're enabling Jehovah, the fraud. They see him as a fraud. But why is Jehovah able to do miracles and they can't? It's because you believe in Jehovah. So by believing in Jehovah, you're giving him power and enabling him to do miracles. But if instead you would not believe in Jehovah and instead you would believe in communism, then the communists, would be able to have the same superpowers, and they would be able to transcend all of society. But it can only work if everyone is on board. That's why they're so opposed to opposition. They have to destroy any and all opposition the world over. Otherwise, in their mind, it doesn't work. And they have to destroy the belief in Jehovah, especially in Jehovah. Of course, they also have to destroy other religions. They have to destroy the belief in any other God. You can't have, that's why communism is so opposed to religion. Because in their mind, you can only truly achieve communism, which is something completely religious, something completely spiritual. They're trying to make all of society ascend. They're basically trying to collapse the matrix for everyone, right? And make all of society transcend. So that basically we all become our own gods. But that can only work if no one believes in an external God. That's why they persecute religions so much, and especially persecute people who believe in Jehovah. So yeah. Okay, that was pretty long, and I repeated myself a lot. I didn't use a script. I apologize, but I really wanted to get that point across, right? Because that's so difficult for people to understand, for normal, sane people to understand. Because these people are not sane, these people are literally delusional, right? So, anyway, if you want to watch my stream I did with Lloyd, I'll put it in the description. And if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to check out my Substack. You know, most of my new stuff is on Substack, not so much on YouTube anymore. So if you haven't, check out my Substack. Of course, on my Substack, I also have a lot of movie reviews, which kind of ties into that topic because, like I said, Gnosticism is actually very popular in Hollywood. So you have a lot of Hollywood movies that are propagating these kinds of things, and I always try to analyze them a little bit. So go check out my Substack, go check out my stream with Lloyd